This talk will talk about first using LLM in code translation, that is, translating code bases from one source programming language to another target programming language, and then the type migration problem, that is a key challenge in LLM-based translation to ensure correct variable types at the declaration stage. We'll introduce an optimized type migration framework to address this problem and also our results of the experiments. LLMs have transformed code translation from traditional rule-based approaches to a more automated and data-driven way. There are now several frameworks and benchmarks such as COST, CodeTrans, that have proved LLM can produce translations that are both syntactically and semantically correct on function and file-level code translation. However, none of existing work achieved a fully automated translation of repositories due to incomplete compilations. This is understandable as repositories are significantly larger in scale compared to individual functions or files. They often involve cross-file references, which are difficult to capture when the entire code base cannot fit in the model's context window. And we have to segment the code, which leads to memory loss. We focus on translating C to Rust in our work because Rust offers strong guarantees that can address some of the memory safety issues in C code bases. Rust eliminates buffer overflows, use after free errors by its strict ownership and borrowing system. So this challenge is more pronounced in C to Rust translation because C language heavily relies on header files to manage global variables across multiple files. Since there are no existing C to Rust repository-level translation benchmark, we conducted a manual translation with the assistance of an LLM to better understand the challenges that are hidden in fully automated LLM-based repository translation. We selected the Gzip package, which is originally written in C, and manually translated it into Rust. The resulting Rust implementation now supports both compression and decompression. We also translate the original test suite from C package to evaluate correctness. The Rust version successfully passed 64 out of 69 tests. The remaining failures were primarily due to differences in underlying libraries or systems calls, or logic errors in the translation of internal functions. And we also identify two key issues related to type migration, which we believe should be addressed prior to translating the functionality of the code. One is about multiple mutable references. As illustrated in the diagram, Rust discourages global variables to ensure memory and concurrency safety. Global variables and functions in C are translated into struct fields and methods in Rust. Consider the following C code snippet, where functions pass global variables among themselves. If directly translating from LLM, these global variables become struct field, and the corresponding function calls lead to multiple parts of self being borrowed simultaneously. This is because for methods in Rust, the first parameter is conventionally self, referencing the struct instance on which the method is called. And if a C function originally takes global variables as parameters, a direct translation might produce signatures including self and self.x in Rust. Because self.x is part of self, Rust's borrowing rules interpret this as multiple mutable references to the same underlying data within a single call. It is also hard for LLM to detect and fix it because, in practice, self don't appear before self.x. To address the problem, we employ data flow graphs to track how data propagates between operations and functions, including variables definitions, assignments, and usages. Hopefully, by examining how a variable is used in subsequent code, LLM can avoid passing multiple parts of self to a method. If there is indeed a struct field that is passed to a method, we ask the LLM to pass a numerator instead, and the enumerator functions as an indicator to tell which parts of self are used later in the function. This diagram shows the correct translation with enumerators. The global variable x and y in C are translated to field x and y in abstract to meet the ownership requirements in Rust. Then, in a method which modifies x and y, instead of passing self.x and self.y directly, we pass two enum indicators, so the function can tell which part of self to modify without the risk of borrowing self multiple times. And compared to redesign the code or set auxiliary functions, using enum indicators actually preserves most readability and functionality. Here is another complexity in type migration. In C, pointers can be incremented or decremented to directly access or manipulate memory addresses. By contrast, Rust's VAC only allows element access through indexing and does not support pointer arithmetic. Consequently, pointers from C cannot be naively translated into Rust's box, reference, VAC, or slice types. LLM-based translations often fail to make this distinction because C uses the same declaration syntax for both scalar and array pointers. Let's take a look at each type of the pointers, and we can see that even with the exact same declaration, we can assign a value dynamically malloc memory or use it for indexing. But in Rust, each variable needs to be initialized at the declaration stage, so if the context window of a LLM can only capture the declaration of a pointer, it cannot tell what Rust type to map to, and normally it is translated to a scalar pointer and creates an index out of range problem. This complexity is detected during our manual translation where the LLM misinterpreted the type of a linked list pointer. It recognized struct node next as pointing to a single node, overlooking the fact that the same pointer can point to an array of nodes. The diagram here vividly illustrates the issue. For a singly linked list and a multi-linked list, the C-struct node is exactly the same at the declaration stage. But for Rust, the pointer next needs to tell whether pointing to an array or a single node. If not, this creates a type mismatch problem in the future. And the correct translation is so close to the wrong one that prompting LLM to fix this problem is not gonna work either. To address this problem, we also apply data flow graphs, as it is a compacted version of code that tells the future usage of a variable and saves in token limit. The diagram describes our strategy for distinguishing between scalar pointers, array pointers, and pointer arithmetic. After using Clan's static analysis tool to create a data flow graph outlining key pointer operations such as memory allocation or pointer arithmetic, we feed the pointer declaration and its data flow graphs to the LLM, which decides among a box of slice, reference, VAC, or boxes, or index. If it's an unallocated array pointer, we use VAC or box of slice. If it's a pointer to array elements, we use index type that stores the pointer's initial position and handles pointer arithmetic. And if it's other pointers, it will be translated to default box or reference. Our approach targets repository-level translation, where translation quality is ideally measured by the number of passed tests after compilation. However, like all existing methods, ours too struggles to produce compilable code, and compilation error counts does not reliably reflect translation quality. We therefore manually verify translation accuracy by comparing variable types against those in our fully manually translated and compilable code. We translated 151 global variables from 12 C files in the Gzip C package, as well as 76 local variables from 8 functions in flat C file. For our experiment, we used ChatGPT-o1 as the language model. The prompt template is in the right diagram. So for global variables, we first ask LLM to create a state struct, and then we ask LLM to create enum indicators for all the variables that have been used as function parameters in its corresponding data flow graph. And for pointer variables, we ask the LLM to translate the function header and local variable definitions within the function. If the data flow graph shows that there are malloc or kloc operations in the data flow graph, we ask the LLM to translate it to a vec or a box of slice. If the data flow graph indicates that there are array indexing or pointer arithmetic in its corresponding data flow graph, we ask the LLM to translate to index type. And if else, it will be translated into a scalar pointer. As instructed in our prompts, for certain global variables passed as parameters to functions or stored in other structs, our methods create enum indicators at the declaration stage. Among all 151 global variables, our approach introduced 14 enum indicators, and this highlights the necessity of these indicators to prevent multiple mutable borrowing. By contrast, the baseline approach lacked the data flow information required to trigger enum generation, and they introduced no new enum values. The blue color indicates global variables, and for baseline it remained 28 of them as static variables, that is, immutable. And the orange is the struct fields, which ensures safe memory management and satisfies Rust's lifetime requirements. The gray ones are enum indicators, that is, to help prevent multiple borrowing problem. We selected the inflatc file for pointer type migration experiment because it is largely self-contained. It defines its own tree node structure and avoids calls to external C files. The upper diagram illustrates the distribution of local variables in inflatc file, which indicates the importance of correctly mapping pointers. Our approach processes each function by first build the data flow graph for all variables in one function. Then the resulting data flow graphs, together with the prompt templates, form the input to the LLM. The baseline method translates the variables without data flow information. And as shown in the lower diagram, our approach successfully identified the correct pointer types and only got to run. And the baseline failed to distinguish all of the pointers that are not scalar ones, and they resorted to referencing counting cells. This actually suggests that the LLM is cautious about using raw pointers in Rust, and they attempt to work around this by defaulting to referencing counted types. But reference counting is insufficient in this context. It does not guarantee exclusive mutable access, and they fail to properly suggest pointer arithmetic, and they are often required in C code. To conclude, our work identified key gaps in C to Rust type migration. We propose a data flow approach using enums to eliminate mutable multiple borrowing errors and to select appropriate Rust types for C pointers. One fundamental issue here is that many concepts in C and Rust do not have direct one-to-one mapping. When the target programming language like Rust lacks a direct equivalent for a certain C feature, LLM needs to develop a workaround. However, these workarounds are non-trivial for LLMs to generate and often risk violating the safety or design principles of the Rust language. Other than type issues, we also found numerous other low-level incompatibilities from C to Rust in our manual translation. Like Rust does not support negative indexing, and they don't support I++ or -i kind of incremental or decremental operators. So more future work should be developed to generate workarounds for incompatible C and Rust features. And also, more future work should focus on evaluate translation quality. It would be hard since most translation framework now cannot produce compilable code. And that is all for the paper. Thank you for listening.
So unfortunately, there's no Q&A session. So if you have any question, please use this Discord channel. Okay, thank you.